After years of relentless petitioning, fans of Zack Snyder were recently overjoyed to hear that the original director's cut of 2017's Justice League will finally be realised and released on HBO Max early next year. Sadly, due to a family tragedy, Snyder had to step away from the project during post-production, and Avengers helmer Joss Whedon was hired by Warner Bros. To replace him as de facto director. As a result, extensive re-edits, rewrites and reshoots took place, despite principal photography having already been completed. The resulting film was a clash of two highly distinctive directorial styles. Snyder's brooding, more grounded tone did not gel with Whedon's lighter, more comedic sensibilities. Snyder was ultimately credited as the film's director, although in the years since its release he has covertly criticised the final product, frequently suggesting that an alternate cut of the film did in fact exist. Justice League's director of photography, Fabian Wagner, corroborated this, suggesting that the version released in cinemas featured just 10% of the original footage and everything else was from reshoots. The film received mixed to poor reviews and underperformed at the box office relative to Warner Bros. Projections. By all accounts, a superhero team-up film featuring some of the most iconic comic book characters of all time should have proven significantly more popular than it did. As a result of the film's disproportionately large budget, which came about as a result of the reshoots, it is estimated that the studio lost $60 million and therefore caused executives to re-evaluate the slate of DC films going forward. As a result, the notion of a Marvel-esque shared universe was tabled, and so although subsequent films like Aquaman, Shazam and Birds of Prey were technically set in the same story world of the DCEU, they were only loosely connected and served more as standalone films. Other subsequent DC films like Joker and Matt Reeves' upcoming The Batman have no connection to the DCEU at all and are instead set in discrete story worlds. There are currently no plans for another crossover team-up event film in the DC universe, with only further standalone films like Wonder Woman 1984 on the horizon. Despite Justice League's underperformance and its failure to resonate with a mass general audience, a small group of fans founded the #ReleaseTheSnyderCut movement. This group campaigned relentlessly to see Snyder's original vision for the film fulfilled, with mass letter writing, billboards, and even a flying banner making up significant parts of the campaign. The group was also able to raise over $150,000 for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. However, as is the case with most fandoms, some members of the group were labelled as toxic, harassing and even threatening key executives and creatives at Warner Bros. The studio became so inundated with calls about the Justice League Director's Cut that telephone operators were instructed to treat such inquiries as prank calls. Joss Whedon in particular received and continues to receive harassment from certain Snyder fans on Twitter. Despite some of these questionable methods of campaigning and the fact that this movement was a significant minority of viewers, even if they were incredibly vocal, the impossible happened. Snyder announced to his fans that his version of the film would be fully realised and released to the public after more than 3 years since the original theatrical release. It is extremely doubtful, especially given the aforementioned revision to the slate of upcoming DC film projects, that Warner Bros. Would have considered re-releasing Justice League if it weren't for this fan outcry. This is therefore an incredibly significant milestone for audience participation in film production. It proves that studios are willing to listen to their fans and produce content they want under the right circumstances. As other commentators have suggested, however, this announcement could be seen as simply rewarding arguably toxic behaviour. In releasing the Snyder Cut, are Warner Bros. Attempting to alleviate the stress of harassment from some members of the movement? It is worth noting that this is a significant investment. Over $30 million will be spent on polishing visual effects sequences and finalising the film before it's released to the public. Warner Bros. Therefore are clearly looking for some sort of financial reward to justify such an expenditure. And as discussed, the #ReleaseTheSnyderCut fanbase are a minority of viewers. Will the disproportionately vocal demands of this group translate to a return on investment? It's difficult to say, but the group has received significant mainstream media attention since the announcement, which could translate to a bolstering in HBO Max subscriptions next year. Since the success of the Snyder Cut's key objective, other groups have also attempted similar movements, with campaigns for director's cuts of Suicide Squad, Fantastic Four and others springing up. The Snyder Cut is not a campaign in isolation either. Fan outcries regarding the character design of Sonic the Hedgehog encouraged Paramount to delay the film's release and revise the design, and although nothing explicit has been said, Certain facets of The Rise of Skywalker seem to have been written with the intention of directly addressing criticisms of the previous film, The Last Jedi. These examples also involve the regular harassment of key creatives on social media, and so could similarly be argued as toxic campaigns. Some of these cases, like with Sonic and Justice League, involve studio interference. Executives meddled with the film's production to produce an end product which differed from the director's original intention. The autonomy of the director is something which should generally be advocated for, as it allows for a clear, untampered vision for a film. Regardless of your opinion on Man of Steel or Batman v Superman, they are clearly Zack Snyder films, with his signature style and flair stamped over them, and as a result are much more tonally consistent than Justice League. However, it's ultimately the studio's prerogative to change these films as they see fit. Ultimately, they own the rights to the characters, and it's their decision how they're to be portrayed. Furthermore, it could be argued that films like Sonic and Justice League are designed more as products, in that they are constructed to appeal to a mass audience and generate as much profit as possible. This is not to say that high-budget blockbuster films cannot be the products of an auteur's vision. As discussed, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman are arguably more successful stories precisely because of the lack of studio interference. However, such films are entertainment first and foremost, unlike some lower-budget productions, for which directorial autonomy is absolutely crucial to realising the vision of a film. In that regard, it is understandable that Warner Bros. Would want to exert as much creative control over their intellectual property as possible, as ultimately they're the financiers of such projects and expect to see returns on their investments. To that end, they clearly believe that the Snyder Cut has the potential to make them money. There is no way they would allocate such a large budget to complete the film if a market for it did not exist. So while the campaign can count the announcement of the cut as a win, the onus is now on them to prove that this film can in fact reach a mass audience. But where does this movement end? Snyder's actual original vision for Justice League was a trilogy of films which clearly do not exist because they were never shot. But going back further, his actual original vision was for a standalone Man of Steel trilogy, akin to the Dark Knight trilogy. In response to the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Warner Bros. Mandated that the Man of Steel sequel include other DC characters. It could therefore be argued that Batman v Superman was not Zack Snyder's original vision. Seeing as some campaign members harassed Aquaman director James Wan and Shazam director David Sandberg for not continuing Snyder's vision for the DCEU, and Warner Bros. Have no plans for another team-up event film, does the campaign continue until the entire slate of films is revised? It's unlikely to think that such a vocal group will be satiated with one film alone, especially if Snyder's Justice League includes teasers for future films which, given the current slate of future DC projects, will likely never be made. I think that despite the good that came about from the movement, some members went about the campaign in a toxic and harassing manner, and their eventual success sends the wrong message to other fandoms. It seems to encourage such behaviour, suggesting that if fans are vocal enough and consistent enough, that studios will eventually cave to their demands. I do think that as a proprietor for directors having a voice and fulfilling their visions, that Warner Bros.' decision to release the cut is to be applauded. And this is a respect of the Snyder Cut campaign that I ultimately can support, even if I recognise that it's ultimately the studio's decision as to what content they produce and distribute. However, I don't agree with certain members' methodology, and unfortunately, because the ultimate ends have justified their means, we may see more similar campaigns in the future. Thank you for watching. This is a difficult topic, and I genuinely don't mean to have offended anyone watching, so if you do disagree, I'd love to hear why in the comments. Equally, if you do agree or have anything at all you'd like to say on the topic, please let me know. Until next time, thanks.